Did you know that history time is fun time? Well, the beginning of this video might not be that fun because all you're going to be doing is copying some words into definitions. But the good news is you don't have to look them up yourself in the glossary. I kind of forgot about the definitions before I planned on making the video for this PowerPoint, so that's what we're starting with. On your paper, you should fill in the words that are missing, and they are highlighted in yellow for these important words. The first definition you're writing or you're completing is sacrament, and the next one is Benedictine rule. So if at any time during the definition section I speak too quickly, you should pause the video so you can get all of the missing information onto your sheet. Then this set of words is secular, papal supremacy, and canon law. These are all terms that will come up in the PowerPoint, and so I wanted you to have a general sense of the definitions of what they meant. So that's why you're filling in the definitions. Remember, pause the video in order to get all the information that you need. This slide has two words that go together, excommunication and interdict, and you'll hear about them in the PowerPoint, and they were really harsh penalties and things you really wanted to avoid back in the Middle Ages, because if you got kicked out of the Catholic Church, it was very bad back then. Very, very bad. This term is anti-Semitism. So unfortunately, there's anti-Semitism at this time in history in Europe. And there is still anti-Semitism today, unfortunately, as well, over 1,000 years later. Okay, when you are all set with these definitions, you can put the paper aside and move on to the PowerPoint notes packet. This video is about the medieval church, which is the same as the Catholic Church, so I would like you on your paper to underline medieval church, the heading at the top, and to write Catholic Church underneath it, just like I've done on the slide. And church was really important during the Middle Ages to people, so think of something in your life that is really important to you. You spend a lot of time doing it or spend a lot of time thinking about it, and that's the way church was during the Middle Ages. And it can be kind of hard for people in modern times to understand that because not as many people are religious, or maybe religion isn't the central part of your life. But during the Middle Ages, it was very, very important to people, and the church was very, very powerful. So in the Middle Ages, if you were a Christian in Europe, you were part of the Catholic Church. There were no other options regarding religion. The Eastern Orthodox Church, which we studied during the Byzantine Empire, was not in Europe, the main part, like in Europe that you would think of Europe today, England, France, Germany, those areas. So it was like as if there was only one soda choice, Coca-Cola. There was only one choice for Christians in Europe, Catholic Church. And almost everyone in Europe, or the majority of Europeans, were Christian, meaning they were Catholic. So the church, like I've said, was really important and influenced everyday life and had lots of power, not just in religion, but also economics, political power as well. If you're not part of the Catholic Church, which I've abbreviated RCC on this slide and others, you were viewed with suspicion and you were an outsider, and people were not fond of that. This song clip that I'm about to play has to do with the Catholic Church being really powerful in the world, at least in Europe. So if you weren't familiar with that band, it is Van Halen. They were popular when I was growing up. All right, moving on. So the parish priest was the person who was in charge of the church, and they were the focal point of the church. And what you're filling in has to do with the role of the parish priest, what they did, celebrating Mass, and administering the sacraments to people. And the sacraments were really important. That was one of the definitions you wrote down, because they thought that this would bring you to heaven and earn you salvation. And that was something that was on people's mind a lot and that they thought a lot about in this time period. At any point in the video, like I usually say, pause the video if it's going too fast and you need to catch up and write something. So a key fact that is on this page is that the average person did not read. So you are not writing that in, although it is very important, and you should underline what I've underlined on that fourth bullet. So the priest was really important because he interpreted the Bible for the average citizen who did not read. So all the information about religion that people had, the average person at least, came from the priest. So the other information that you're writing in has to do with how priests helped people who needed it, and that the priest would interact with people of all social classes. And that's pretty much true today, I would say, as well. So the church was often the largest building in the village, and it served a social function as well as a religious function. So you're writing that in on your paper. And the first bullet point that you're writing in, town meetings, comma, plays, comma, concerts held in churches. The picture, I might be able to move it, is in the way. There we go. You can see it a little better. So you're writing that in. Also, there was something called a tithe. That's Tithe. That you are writing in. That is a certain amount of money that people are expected to pay the church, but it was often in goods, not money, because most of Europe was not using money at this point of history. This music clip has to do with giving money to the church. So there's nothing to write in here, but holidays were important to Christians of the Middle Ages, and as were saints. And the definition of saint is a person officially recognized as being entitled to public veneration. That means like worship and admiration, and capable of interceding for people on earth. That means that Catholics believe that saints can kind of influence life on earth for people. This slide says that you should answer this question on your half sheet, but since you're watching the video, we're not going to do it that way. At the bottom of page 1, just list 3 ways the church influenced life for people or had a role in people's lives, like one way the church influenced people or their lives. So pause the video and look at the information on page 1 and just list 3 ways the church influenced medieval life or had a role in people's lives. And then I'll be back. All right, we're back. This next set of information has to do with the Catholic Church's attitudes about women. While there's nothing to write in for the first bullet, I want you to underline God, okay, maybe a couple times, because sometimes students kind of don't understand this fact. Anyway, so there's a belief about what God thinks, and then the next bullet's saying what was true on earth. So you may need to pause the video to write what the belief on earth was about women, but there was a belief that women needed men to help them avoid sin. And sin was bad. That was anything you would do that would go against God. And that would make it harder for you to get to heaven, and that would be very bad. So another fact about women was that there was a minimum age of marriage of 12 years old. Now that doesn't seem right to you, I'm sure. You know, life was different back then. Remember, the life expectancy of a peasant was around 35 years. Anyway, so the minimum age of marriage was to make it so that girls couldn't be married too young. And like I said, I know 12 seems young to us today in modern times, but life was different then. It's not like you had girls who were dropping out of 7th grade to get married, because the average peasant person did not, boy or girl, did not go to school like you do today. So the last fact has to do with men being fined if they seriously hurt their wives. So these are all the facts about the church and women, well, at least some of them. The next topic has to do with monks and nuns. So underneath the heading monks and nuns, I want you to underline the second sentence that starts with men became monks. The sentence I underlined on the PowerPoint. So monks and nuns were really important to the church, and one important person was a man named Benedict, and we're going to watch a small movie clip about him. And he created some rules for monks and monasteries that became known as Benedictine rule. So here are the rules. 1, you need to obey the person who's in charge of the monastery, who's an abbot, or the abbess. That's someone who's in charge of the convent. This is the rule you're writing in. Poverty, which means you don't own a lot of material goods. And the last one, chastity, purity, is just saying you're not going to get married. So besides the rules you had to follow, you had information. The next bullet talks about daily life, what they did every day. And then also the last bullet talks about manual labor that they did. So this would be like farming. So they did a lot of different things and were very, very busy. One thing that's also true is they had a lot of prayers and chores that they did. They prayed 7 to 8 times a day, including the middle of the night. So they were woken up to pray. And the last bullet with the farming in the monasteries shows you that monasteries were self-sufficient, that they could, produce most of what they needed on the monastery. The monks and nuns also had to provide certain services, and that's listed there under the second bullet. And they might provide a place for travelers to stay because there were no hotels for people, but I wouldn't say a monastery was a hotel. It was just like if you were a noble and you were traveling somewhere, you might be able, or someone of the church maybe, you might be able to stay at a monastery in your travels because that was your best option. So a really important function of the monasteries and convents was to preserve ancient writings, and this was considered a type of manual labor, that they were copying the ancient writings. And a lot of times the ancient writings were just, the copying of them was done to preserve knowledge. The point wasn't to create more books for people to read. It was just to preserve old knowledge from the past. And the language that they did all of this in was Latin. I'm going to end the video. Oops, let's go back. I'm going to end the video on this slide because my time's almost up. I only have 15 minutes. And So I'm going to stop it here and do another video.